Are you looking for a way to make co-parenting easier? Talking Parents can help you streamline your shared parenting responsibilities and minimize conflict by keeping all interactions organized and documented. With Talking Parents, you can stop worrying about the he said, she said, and focus on what matters most, your children. Download the app in the Apple or Google Play Store and start a 30-day free trial today. Hey, welcome back. We're talking today about a guide to high net worth divorce and untangling the finances and preserving stability. And with me today is Donna Cates, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. So, of course, divorce is never easy, but when significant wealth is involved, it can become more complex. And if contention is involved, that just makes it double trouble. Untangling intertwined finances, dividing assets fairly, and ensuring future financial stability for both parties really requires an expert who's knowledgeable in financing. And so today we're going to dive into those intricacies with Donna Cates. Donna is a certified divorce financial analyst, and she has over 20 years experience as a financial advisor, wealth builder, and a CDFA. And she brings a unique blend of expertise and empathy to her work. You can read more about her in the show notes, as well as about the rest of the details of today's show. But we're going to dive right in. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor.
Donna, I'm really excited about today's topic. Before we dive in, I didn't give you a heads up, so I apologize. But before we dive in, I have a special question I ask my guests, and it's
Okay.
just to get a sense of the broader person that you are. So, would you share with our audience something that you're really proud of from in your life?
Oh, that's a tough one. I will tell you that I'm super, super proud of the new book that I just published because I've never thought I was bold enough to put something out. And I did birth a book in August of 2024. So I'm super proud of that and very hopeful that it'll be widely read and help people as they're navigating divorce.
And the name of it is?
The name of it is Divorce Decoded, a manifesto for women navigating divorce and beyond.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, that is something to be very proud of. Writing a book is quite the undertaking, right? So let's dive into this. We were talking offline. It's so important to understand your finances, and especially when we're dealing with affluent clients, they can be really complex. I had another expert like you on a couple of years ago, and at a certain point, I was just like, and what else? And what else? Like, I literally didn't even know enough to ask. And I find that the non-moneyed spouse is often scared, right? They don't know it. They kind of gave it all to the other spouse to handle. And now they have to pull documents together that they might not know where to find or have passwords for. And then they're looking at all of this and they don't even know what it is. And so people can put their head in the sand, like really shy away from it. So let's just start before we get into any numbers. Just what would you say to the listener if they're in this position, they're just entering divorce? What would you say to them about how to manage and engage with their finances?
I will tell you, everything that you said about the divorce process and the overwhelm with the money is so right. I think, and this a distinction I wanted to share with you too, is that it doesn't matter how affluent or how smart and educated you are. Most women have a tendency to shy away from the money stuff, and they do stick their head in the sand. And that's not a criticism, it's just a reality. And I think it's because most of us just have too much on our plates. So if we can delegate a responsibility to somebody else that's happy to do it, we gladly do it. And unfortunately for us, that often tends to be the money stuff. So I always preach to women, and I call it preaching because I get on my soapbox. As a woman, we are likely to be divorced. We are likely to outlive our spouse. So it's not an if, but a when we're going to be fully financially responsible for ourselves. So I always encourage everybody to have as much knowledge as they can about their financial situation so that when life does happen, they're not deer in the headlights. Oh my gosh, I don't know anything. So to me, if you're thinking about divorce, the first priority, and I would say this is important even before you meet with an attorney, is to start gathering all of the financial information that you can. Now, in this computer age that we're in, a lot of times we don't have clear access to information because we may not have the passwords. We may not have access to our spouse's W-2 or what have you. But if you work from a list of all of the possible documents that you're going to need when you negotiate your divorce, this will give you the tools that you need to start searching for it. And if you can get your hands on it, great. If you can't get your hands on it, that's okay. Just put a question mark next to it. And we know that when you do meet with your attorney, the attorney's going to have to ask your spouse to share that information. But everything that you can pull together in advance is just going to help you save time, possibly save money, because you're actually showing the attorney what you have to work with.
Right. And I'm wondering, I love what you said. I completely agree with it. I'm wondering if you could also speak to our male listeners, because I find a lot of times the men that we work with who are often the primary earner, that they have their own challenge with the finances. They may not have been, they're working really hard at bringing it in. I've got a couple of clients where it's going out the back door, but they're not tracking it. And so even that whole concept of negotiating, budgeting, doing what's fair and reasonable is equally as murky for them. What would you say to those earners, those primary earners?
And this is really important because we have equitable distribution states. We have the 50-50 straight out the door. But what we have to know is when you enter into divorce, everything that you own together, I mean, it literally is both of your properties because you were married. So if you think about when you're negotiating how you're going to divide everything, and our goal is to come out with the most fair and equitable distribution that we can, you're going to want to make sure that you can define what all of your income sources are, what your after-tax cash flow looks like, clearly identifying your expenses. Most of us don't track our expenses. We call it having a budget. We're not talking about budget. We're literally saying, how much is it costing you to live the lifestyle that you're living today? That number is going to be important for both parties, especially for the breadwinner, because you're going to have to come up with the reality of whether or not you can afford to pay alimony or any type of property settlement. So being very clear about what your expenses are, what your cash flow looks like, and voluntarily providing that information to the other party. That's the thing, is a lot of times when the D word comes up, we get very protective about our information and start withholding it. But if you do that, you're just costing yourself more money and more stress. So if you can come to the divorce table with your spouse and an open mind and willingness to share all of the financial information, you're going to come out ahead because you're going to be less stressed. She's going to be less stressed, and it's not going to cost you as much to negotiate.
Right. So let's talk for a moment about hours. It's probably one of the first rules when I meet a new client and start talking. And if it's the non-moneyed spouse and they start talking about his or her money, and I'm like, nope, nope. From this point forward, you're not allowed to say that. And we practice our money. And it's so interesting how uncomfortable that is, especially if you've been living for decades with someone who's, and I know that this is largely the stay-at-home mom, not completely. I have a number of high-earning women, but largely. And so there's this messaging that it's mine, and you get an allowance and you get a beautiful life and you get to go on vacations, as if anyone would ever say, I would like to stand at the altar and enlist myself as a slave and just take whatever generosity or pittance you throw in my direction. And so I think that that's so important. If you could talk about your experience with people who come to the table and don't really feel any ownership of those marital assets.
It is a sad reality, and I don't know the why behind this, but men typically have a very firm attachment to their pensions and their retirement assets. And I imagine that they've been the hard workers, they've been the diligent savers, they've earned that money, and they oftentimes will just say, "You're not getting any of my pension." And the reality is that if that pension was accrued over the course of the marriage, it's half hers already. So we really have to have the mindset of understanding that everything that we have, we are both owners of. Now, a lot of times where I see a lot of conflict is when someone has inherited assets, and that often creates issues because the inheritance came from someone's parent, for example. I'm going to give you a quick scenario. I have a client. She actually inherited a beach condo from her mother, and once they inherited that, started using that beach condo as their vacation home.
Mhm.
And when they weren't using it for vacation, they were renting it out. So they were also getting rental income. So while she came to the table saying, "That's my house, my mama gave that to me," in reality, from a legal perspective, that is a commingled asset jointly owned by both parties. They both it had advantages from it, including additional income. So although she felt that it was rightfully hers, from a legal perspective, it wasn't. Now, that doesn't mean that she couldn't negotiate her getting to keep that asset, but if she kept 100% of it, that means she was going to be giving up something else so that we could have that equitable distribution. But that I see that a lot, especially when there's inherited assets. If there's somebody that received money from a personal injury or something.
Okay, so this is your area, and I want to make sure that our listeners are tracking you. So define commingled.
Commingled means that we have used a bucket of money. I'm going to use money versus a house. We have used this particular asset for the benefit of the family. Okay, so I have a brokerage account. That brokerage account is solely in my name. I sit that money there, nothing ever happens to it. I'm not pulling money out and using it. That could literally be considered a separate property if I had that money before I was married. Okay. But as soon as I start pulling money out of that account and using it to pay for a vacation, or remodeling the home that I live in with my spouse, that asset that I was considering mine because I had it before we got married now could be considered a commingled asset because it's been used for the benefit of the family.
I have to be honest with you. You're teaching me something. I was not aware that something like that would be commingled. I know that if I had a house and I got married and my spouse moved in and we did renovations and we did other things, that that's commingled. But you're saying something interesting. Or if I have an inheritance, what you're saying is if I have an inheritance and I spend even $1 of that inheritance on my spouse or anything else, the entire inheritance is then considered commingled. That's so interesting.
It is, and it's complicated. And again, I say this, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to give any legal counsel on that. But the thing is the fact that that asset has been used for the benefit of the family in any way is what makes it commingled. But again, you have to negotiate whether or not you're going to keep it all or if you're going to have to share it. From a legal perspective, because it was commingled, it is now an asset that could be divided.
Yeah, so there's so many different buckets to look in, right? Let's pull back a bit because we're going down a rabbit hole, and I want to bring us back to something a little more basic for a minute. So when we talk about these topics, and we're not just talking to the average Joe, we're talking to somebody who would fall into high net or affluent. What's different? What is different for the affluent audience?
Things get a little bit more complicated. There's typically more in the way of assets. There's more potential for business ownership, multiple real estate properties. All of the more that you have, the more complex it gets. And using a business owner, I have a couple, he owned a business. She's not involved in the business. In his mind, he's saying, this is my business. I grew this practice, right? But in the reality is, even though she's not an owner of it, half of that business belongs to her. So when we're looking at that one asset, the business has to be valued. It's not something you can just go and buy. There's already a price tag on it. So there's probably going to have to be a formal business valuation done where we're actually looking at, if we were to sell this today, how much could you get for it? And once that business valuation is done, then we look at what portion of that would be considered a marital asset. That is hiring another professional. And the unfortunate thing is, a lot of people don't want to have a business valued because it's not an inexpensive process. You can spend $5,000, $10,000, $15,000
Okay.
just to get a business valued. But I have one client who elected to use an older valuation because it was like 3 or 4 years prior to their divorce. And she ended up regretting that. She didn't want to do it because she was going to have to pay $10,000 to have a new one done. But what happened is she ended up getting half of that business. So she got $2 million out of the $4 million business. Then the year post divorce, her husband decided to sell that practice. And when he sold it for 7 million, not 4 million. Now we don't know because the business valuation wasn't done, and that was a year later. But had she invested that $10,000 to do the business valuation, she likely would have walked away with more of those assets.
Oh, yeah. So you're describing the quintessential penny wise, pound foolish person, which is often fueled by financial fear.
Fear,
What's
right?
interesting is she got two, and you think, well, what percentage of 2 million is 10,000? And maybe she could have gotten 3.5 rather than two. And so that's really interesting. So I think that it brings us back to my first statement, which is if you're not comfortable with numbers, if you're not comfortable with money, that's fine. That makes perfect sense because there are people who are. And Donna and I were talking offline about how it takes a village to help someone through divorce. And so many of my clients, the one no for everybody is if I'm going for a divorce, I probably have to hire an attorney if I could afford one. And then a lot of people say, well, it's emotional, so I'll get a therapist, which is really helpful in connecting the dots. But the other pieces are a divorce coach who can be strategic and help you with the day-to-day emotional upsets that come up and how to begin to behave differently. A CDFA or a financial expert like Donna, who really understands all these numbers and who also understands that you could have two assets and they could, on their face, both be $500,000 assets, but they're not equal. And so when we make decisions without expertise, we can be like Donna's client and really undercut ourselves. Your kids may not be the only ones taking tests this year. Soberlink is the #1 alcohol monitoring device on the market for parents who need to prove their sobriety. Here's how it works. Your co-parent will test at scheduled times each day. Built-in facial recognition confirms their identity. Tamper sensors flag any attempts to cheat. And results get sent instantly to your phone. So you know your kids are with a sober parent, whether it's during school nights or weekends away. Set your family up for success this school year. Visit Soberlink.com/JBD to learn more and get $50 off your device. Are you looking for a way to make co-parenting easier? Talking Parents can help you streamline your shared parenting responsibilities and minimize conflict by keeping all interactions organized and documented. With Talking Parents, you can stop worrying about the he said, she said, and focus on what matters most, your children. Download the app in the Apple or Google Play Store and start a 30-day free trial today. Divorce feels like an overwhelming perfect storm as you navigate pain, fear, and confusion while struggling with unfamiliar legal procedures and the pressure to make complex decisions that will impact the rest of your life. Our free Rapid Relief Call provides the clarity and confidence you're yearning for. Visit rapidreliefcall.com for support and guidance today.
Yeah. One thing that we've not talked about yet that is really impactful on that, having a $500,000 account, and then this 500,000, we automatically think that's equal. That sounds pretty fair, right? But how those assets are taxed when they're sold, that if it's a property and you get an exclusion from having to pay taxes, there are so many moving pieces to it. And that's why I think it's imperative to work with somebody that has the expertise of the CDFA, because we don't know these things. So and a lot of times we just don't even know what we don't know to ask. So we're going to actually lift the hood and look under the hood at all of the different moving pieces. And as a CDFA, what the role of that person is to help you understand not just the immediate day the divorce is finalized, what your financial situation is going to look like, but what it could look like a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Now, oftentimes your divorce attorney, you're hiring that divorce attorney to divide everything that you have equitably, your assets and your income. So that's what they're looking at.
And your debt.
Right, and the debt. We can't forget the debt. But they're looking at literally today. When you add the CDFA, now you're taking into consideration, if I make the decision to keep the house or not keep the house or whatever, how's that going to look for me a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years? So it's forward looking with the purpose of helping you make more informed decisions versus just purely emotional decisions. Because it's no doubt a divorce is an emotional period of time, and that's where we're making our decisions from. So we kind of help you take a step back and be the outsider looking in, helping you understand if you do decide to do X, Y, or Z, what's that going to mean to you financially, not just today, 5 years from now.
Yeah, 100%. The forecasting that you get from these financial experts is so powerful because one is, and especially with high net, you don't have to pay as close attention to your budget because there's a lot of money going around. And so I often find that they don't know what their budget is. They know that they're vacationing and traveling and buying the stuff that they're buying and what have you, but there's no spreadsheet. There's no chart of what's going on. And so then what comes with that I have seen Donna so often is the stories that he actually makes $50 million, but he's only showing me. And so there's stories that go into it because there's no numbers. And so I was talking to a financial person who was describing how you folks, you financial experts, see the world and how numbers don't lie. Like numbers are so pure. And if we can get all the numbers on the table, then the story that there's no bullshit. The story is the story. And then if we can forecast, then we can say, well, you've been living at this rate over the next 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to need this. And then let's look at what's here. And I've spoken to some financial advisors who have to have that really hard conversation with someone that you have a decent amount of money, but if you're not going to change your lifestyle, you have to go get a side hustle. Like you actually need more money. You're going to spend more money than you have. And so can you just talk a little bit to that part of it, to really understanding the numbers, and maybe if you have a story of what it was like to have a client get really crystal clear and grounded in the reality when maybe they thought they either had more than they had or.
Absolutely. So the reality is, if you picture it, we're starting out with this. We've got this whole big old bucket and we're splitting it in half. We still have the same living expenses. So the money that we have is now going to support two separate households. And that can look like a number of different things. But if you don't do anything any differently with the way that you're spending money and ensuring that you're getting the growth that you need in your invested assets, the reality is you're going to run out. And I think, to your point, the fact that most of us don't operate from a budget, we don't know what we're literally spending month to month. That can be one of the most valuable assets, is to sit down and say, these are literally all of my expenses, and seeing what the real numbers are. And I do this with my financial planning clients. I don't just say, hey, how much do you have left over at the end of each month? I want to know, where's your money going? Because if the reality is you feel like you can't afford to save, or you can't afford to pay for your attorney, chances are, if we evaluate where you're spending your money today, there's something that you're either paying more for than you even realize that you could cut back on. You may just reprioritize. Heck, I've had clients that are spending $300 a month on cable television, and when I challenge them about how much TV they watch, they go, never thought of that, right? But the one horror story that I can share with you is a woman who was divorcing, and she literally could not afford to get a home, but she insisted on getting a home. So she divorced, and she had to wait about a year because she was getting alimony income, and it took that long for that alimony to be considered part of her income to support her getting a mortgage. So she waits that period of time, she buys a new home, she gets into the home, and discovers literally within 6 months that she had not given any consideration to the cost of maintaining the home. She figured the mortgage, she knew she could pay the mortgage, but she didn't take into consideration the homeowners association, the lawn maintenance, the pool maintenance, all of the things that we have to pay for. And heaven help her if something happened, like a tornado or the roof falls in. So she ended up having to sell the home that she had just bought post divorce, and she ended up losing money because she had to pay the realtor to sell it, and she had very, very little equity in it, and the value of the home had already dropped. So she actually ended up in the negative, in the hole, because of her decision to make that home purchase when she really shouldn't have been purchasing it to begin with.
Yeah. And you just described a perfect example of an emotional decision.
Correct.
An emotional decision. And I think that I see that so often, where it's such a tender conversation to have. If you've been married 25, 35 years, you raised your kids in the house, and you didn't want the divorce, holding on to that house is actually holding on to all other types of things, and helping someone get to that place of really, like, that's where I think what you do and what I do merges, right? So you're showing them the numbers, but I'm coming at it from the depth of their emotion, and gently inviting them to consider what those other possibilities are and walking them down that path. I've had numerous people where they knew this is going to be, I know it's going to be tight, but I love the house so much and blah, blah, blah. Well, would you go out and look? Would you just grab a realtor and just go see what else is out there? Are you even open to possibility? And when they're not, when it's like I'm in a room, there's one door, that's the door, I'm buying the house, period, end of story, that can be very dangerous. And especially when you just got through the divorce, and if you have kids still at home, now you're uprooting everyone again. And so it has so many tentacles to it.
Right. And Karen, what I really appreciate about what you're saying is that I'm a very empathetic person, and I can support you emotionally, and I can be gentle with the words, but the numbers are the numbers. And that's my job, is to educate you on what the numbers can do and can't do. So having someone like Karen coaching you through the process and helping you get to the best mental space, an emotional space around all of these decisions, is so impactful.
So then when we haven't really touched yet on like the deeper complexities when you're dealing with hedge funds, when you're dealing with expats and pensions and other private investments and what have you. And you just talk a little bit about that world? I think for people who are even in it, but not the primary earner or not the person managing the money, they probably don't know any more than the person who doesn't have that kind of money. Can you talk a little bit about how that level of complexity comes into play in the role you play with your client?
Absolutely. So the reality is all of these unique products and things that we have out there, they all have they have their own sets of rules on how they can be used, when they mature and are available for payout, the literal ownership and whether or not it can change hands from one party to another. There's the complexity of, is there a market for something? And if there is a market for it, how do we determine what that price is? So again, you're adding more complexity and having to hire specialists who can make those evaluations for you. So I think one of the things that I've encountered recently was an employee who was getting restricted stocks through their employer. And in his mind, that was something he didn't want to share. But that's mine. I earned it. Again, ownership is it's a 50-50 thing. But the complication was that these things they work on a maturity. Like he had the asset in his name, but the company didn't release it for him for a year, 2 years, 3 years. So there's a schedule there. So even though it shows up as an asset valued at this today, it's really not his to give up yet. Now, what that means, and the reason it's important for you to include that in the analysis, is it does still have value. So even though someone may have that value in a restricted stock account, and they can't divide it with you, that doesn't mean we exclude it from the equation. We include that value and say, okay, if he's going to get to keep 100% of that, what else might I get in lieu of that account?
Beautiful.
And we look at taxation when we're making that evaluation as well.
Yeah, perfect. Beautiful. So you mentioned hiring other experts. Let's just list off some of the experts because there's a good chunk of them in the financial realm. So we talked earlier, of course, you, the primary financial expert, the CDFA. And you mentioned earlier a business valuator, somebody who's going to come in and evaluate the business. And I know there's the forensic accountant, right? So if you think that he or she has been squandering money, gambling, having affairs, other such things. So can you describe, let's take, the top three that come to mind, feel free to add, is the business valuator, the forensic accountant, and the Quadro expert. Are there a couple of others that you would add to that list?
I would say we definitely want to, if there's debt, if there's a lot of debt, having a debt counselor involved, there might be opportunity for debt consolidation. I would say that having the valuation expert is going to be probably one of the most important if you have businesses or if you have intellectual property. That's a big one there. You also want to include your CPA. We've talked a little bit about taxes, so it's really important that the CPA be involved in the conversation so that he or she can advise on what the tax implication might be. And those having and then also including the financial advisor. So your CDFA is likely to be a financial advisor as well, but if you're using a CDFA who is not your financial advisor, including that financial professional in the conversation will be helpful because they can help you understand what the cost basis is in particular assets, not just the value, but give you more details that you might need.
And what about, can you describe what a Quadro expert is?
Yes, the Quadro. Thank you for that. So this gets a little complicated because any type of plan, a retirement plan that is held through an employer and it's driven under ERISA. Can't tell you what that stands for the life of me, but the retirement accounts like your 401k, your 403b, 457 plan, thrift savings plan if you're a federal employee, those are all ERISA driven retirement plans. They require an additional legal document to be divided in divorce, and that's called the Qualified Domestic Relations Order. So every company that has a 401k is going to have a procedure for processing those quadros. And this is where I always encourage people, if it's likely that you're going to be receiving or giving up any of your retirement assets to the other party, ask your attorney to engage with that company early versus later, because it takes time to get the sample documents from the company so that the attorney can prepare the document correctly. And then once that document's prepared correctly, then it's submitted to the judge who signs it, and then it goes back to the company. And if it's not done 100% correctly, we start the whole process over again. So
Yeah.
I've had clients that did not have the Quadro prepared and ready to file when the divorce was finalized, and they've ended up 2 and 3 years post-divorce and still not having their retirement assets divided. So that
A
Quadro
hundred.
is very important document.
And I'm going to just add in here, based on a few experts that I've interviewed who say do not, under any set of circumstances, leave it to your matrimonial attorney to do the Quadro. And correct me, Donna, if I misstate here, but I was told the Quadro has the rules of the company, the rules of the state, the rules of the government. Like there's so many complexities in the rules and guidelines that if your attorney says it's a form, this is exactly what the expert said, it's a form, it makes sense, they're like, I could fill out the form, you don't need to go spend thousands of dollars. You check one thing off wrong, you do one thing wrong. And she was telling us stories of people losing tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and even one story in the millions, because the Quadro was not done by somebody who was an expert in Quadros.
Absolutely. Another element that I will add to it that makes it a little bit more complex is there's a one-time opportunity for us to pull money out of a 401k type of account without the 10% penalty if we're not yet 59 and a half, and that is divorce. Now, that's when things can get really boogered up, because it is a tax law that allows us to do that. But if it is not written properly in the divorce decree and the Quadro, we lose that opportunity. And we're asking, and when somebody might do that is, let's say that the majority of their assets are tied up in a retirement account, but they're going to need some of those funds to have a down payment for a house. So someone might be getting a 500,000 or $1 million 401k. They may elect to roll all of that over into an IRA account, but prior to that happening, take out $20,000, $30,000, that where they're getting it penalty free. They still have to pay taxes on it, but they're able to get access to that retirement asset without that penalty. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. Even a lot of family law attorneys aren't aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, which is again such another reason to have your primary financial expert. And I just want to speak to this. We're basically telling you got to hire a staff of people. And the truth is, this is not spending. This is investing. And it's so vitally important that you realize hiring the right matrimonial attorney, hiring a skilled and experienced divorce coach, hiring a financial expert who you trust and who has that depth of expertise. And then being open to what other experts are going to leave me with the most money at the end of my divorce. And when you think of, I can't believe I have clients, and it's like, I can't believe I'm dropping more, I'm dropping more. Obviously, you want to be very discerning about it. But when you hire the right experts, which is one of the things I help all my clients do, you're investing in the best possible financial future, because with that team, you're going to walk away with the most solid settlement. I had a client who I just finished working with last year, and spouse made a lot of money. She was completely in the dark. She got her allowance, and she as we worked together and she got bolder and more courageous, she hired the right financial person. She hired a very high-end forensic that I recommended. And it was actually having that forensic who was so wise and schooled and articulate simply put a report together that got her spouse to the negotiating table and got her more money than she ever knew that she actually had. And so it was the best investment this woman ever made.
Yes, and I'm going to share this with you because I just recently had a conversation with someone. She was talking about how she could not afford to engage with my services, but she definitely needed the services. And I could confidently say I know that she was going to save money in the long run and end up getting more assets if she did allow me to be part of her team. But she was like, no, I'm just not going to do that. I've already paid my attorney $10,000. I'm not going to spend another five or what have you. And I asked her this question, Karen. I said, let's take a walk back in time. How much did you spend on your wedding? 50,000. And I said, okay, so you were happy to invest in the happy occasion, but now that we're here, at the end of this relationship and we're needing to make some really important decisions about how you're going to be prepared to support yourself the rest of your life. And you're telling me that spending more than $10,000 is uncomfortable. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's it. And it's like the fear makes sense. The fear makes so much sense. And for many of you listening, you haven't been in control of the money and you might not even know how much there is. But as you start going through that discovery and putting the financial affidavit together, it's such an investment in you, in your children, in future generations of your children to be really wise and discerning as you walk through this process. And I just know for myself the level of anxiety making such big financial decisions, like pulling numbers out of the air or hoping that my calculation is right, would just unhinge me. And so having the team, like I'm always told, and I'm sure you are too, Donna, like the comfort people have because I know all that I know and I can support them in such a powerful way because you know all that you know. It's like it allows you, the divorcee, to be the CEO of your divorce, to manage, to be the project manager and manage everyone without feeling like you need to know everything because you can't. Your mind is so overwhelmed. Your emotions are so on their last nerve. You can't possibly learn everything. Having that team of people who see you, who hear you, who support you, who are strong advocates on your behalf is really going to allow you to have a slightly easier time going through it and be much better set when that final settlement comes through.
Very well said. And I have to add, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Everybody, or you're literally being given the opportunity to recreate a better life. And I say better, you may have a wonderful life, but if we go into it with the right mindset and we overcome being a victim and we take charge, now we're in a position where we can really empower ourselves to create whatever it is that we want. And having a team of people to support you through that process makes all the difference in the world.
100%. So before we share with the audience how they can find you, and I know you have a gift, do you have any parting words that you want to share before we get to that?
If the message hasn't been received yet, know that you don't have to go through divorce alone. We, on the professional end, we've been through hundreds of divorces, and you've likely not experienced one, or maybe only your second one. You don't be afraid to reach out for support and be cautious about taking recommendations or advice from just friends and family because your friends and family have an experience, but you don't know what their circumstances look like. So we need to make sure that you're talking to a professional who can give you an opinion that is appropriate for your circumstances. Those are the two things: is be courageous, hire your team, and be careful where you take your advice from.
Yeah, and I think I'm just going to end it with, if you do have a spouse who's a big personality, maybe a power imbalance, maybe you've been shut out, shut up, shut down, in your head is their voice about your value, about what is and isn't yours. And that is no way to enter divorce. You want the voice of somebody who's calm, confident, and experienced to balance out that, so that you're listening to people who have your best interest in mind. Yeah. And I know you have a beautiful gift for our listeners.
And the name of this is an ebook, and it's called Surviving the Storm: Navigating Through Divorce with Five Smart Financial Steps. So it's just a really high level overview, but it's definitely a place to start with gathering financial information and getting you on the right path.
Beautiful. And we've got that gift in the show notes linked, so you can grab it there. Why don't you go ahead and tell them what your website is as well? And is it on your website where they would find it if they just went directly there?
Yes, absolutely. So my website is moneymatterswealth.com. The name of my business is Money Matters Wealth Solutions. And you can reach me at the website. You can book a call for a discovery call if you want to have a conversation about potentially working together. Lastly, I'll share I do host a monthly divorce workshop. Now, it is specifically for women, but if you're thinking about or in the throes of divorce, it's a good place to come to get grounded and get some good information from the legal profession, financial profession, and emotional divorce coach, counselor profession.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Look at your numbers, start doing your research, hire your experts, and we are here to support you. Donna, thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll be back again real soon with another episode. Until then, you take care. Thanks for joining us on the Journey Beyond Divorce podcast. I hope you found guidance and encouragement to help you along your journey. If you like my podcast, please take a minute to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. You can also visit us at jbddivorcesupport.com, where our team of coaches support both men and women through our one-on-one coaching, group programs, online courses, and free resources. Stay tuned for our next episode, and I'll talk to you soon.